Today, I want to analyse a few different elements and go through some things that Battlefield 5 didn't really do so well. We all know the game has had major issues that persisted for its entire lifespan, and that ultimately resulted in content support being ended far earlier than anticipated. But there are many elements of the game that, in my opinion, just outright failed, and they didn't succeed in helping the product feel any more complete in any way, shape or form. So today we're going to be discussing those things, and perhaps we can identify which parts of these things that DICE doesn't need to do again moving forward to Battlefield 6. If you are a regular watcher of the channel and you like Battlefield content but you're not yet subscribed, then please consider clicking that subscribe button. Whether you enjoy Battlefield 5, some of you do, Battlefield 4, 3 or even Battlefield 1, then I'll be making plenty of content on those games moving forward. So click subscribe and turn on notifications as well. That way you won't miss any future videos. First of all, we'll start with the practice range, I think. It was originally built as a place for players to just jump in and mess around with different elements of the game, like the weapons, the gadgets, and all the different vehicles, the ground vehicles and the planes, and people could just get a feel for them and basically just test things out. And largely, that was the end product of the practice range, but I don't think it was implemented in the best way. It was added as another element of Battlefield 5 alongside co-op, single-player, multiplayer, and then eventually Battle Royale, and it wasn't utilised to onboard and coach brand new players in perhaps the way that it should have been. An area was crafted from different elements of the Hamada map, and it featured a firing range where you could shoot different weapons. You had an area where you could spawn ground vehicles and drive them around, and you could also spawn in the planes as well, and you could learn the controls. This area would have been perfect for a much more structured tutorial system that players could complete the first time they launched the game, or could fire up as an option if they weren't getting the feel of things in multiplayer. That way they could understand some of the different mechanics like bullet drop or bullet travel time, all the different vehicle controls for some of the more advanced vehicles like the planes in the game. But the practice range wasn't utilised in that way, and it was sort of plonked into the game after launch, kind of a here you go community thing. Here's something that we did, now go and play with it. The real kicker is that after making the practice range and updating it a few times, it was largely left untouched from that point. And then DICE released a full-blown tutorial system a long time later, separate from the practice range, that would teach players brand new mechanics that maybe they weren't used to. So the development team spent even more time and budget on building something that could and probably should have been built into the practice range that already existed in the game. I think this kind of highlights what a messy development cycle Battlefield 5 really had and what the support for it must have really been like. There's a real lack of cohesion and common sense in some decisions that were taken, almost as if they'd been taken in a really rushed manner, and there wasn't proper time to consider what the best option was, and so instead, the quickest or the easiest option was taken instead. Next up is Combined Arms, the co-op mode. Oh dear. Billed by DICE at the reveal of the game as another core pillar of the Battlefield 5 experience, Combined Arms released as probably the most bland, boring, vanilla, pedestrian experience that could have been mustered in the time frame that was given. At reveal, the mode was described as having this mission generation system, and it would have dynamic objectives that would keep the mode feeling fresh. And the mode would have high stakes, making you decide whether to go on to complete more objectives or extract early and bank what you had. The final product could not be further from that description if it tried. What launched in February 2019, 4 months after Battlefield 5 launched, well, it just reused a handful of the multiplayer maps. It copied objectives straight out of the multiplayer and the single player. It ripped off absolutely terrible AI from the single player, mixed it all together, and basically called it a day. There is no mission generation in the co-op mode. Each mission is static, and it's chosen from the main menu, and it plays out the same way every single time. There is nothing high stakes about any of the missions either, because firstly, there's nothing unique or compelling about the content that you're playing through, since it's multiplayer, but without other players, and the AI is so terribly implemented that even somebody brand new to Battlefield would find it extremely easy to complete what was laid on. The mode is nothing like what it was originally advertised as, and once again, I think this can be attributed to a lack of time in development, perhaps also not a curbing of the ambition on the part of the development team. Perhaps the team working on co-op set themselves up to create something really epic, but they didn't properly consider the time that they'd need to make what was actually being pitched. Who knows what the real reasons are for the modes failing, but I think there's one thing that we can definitely be certain that will come out of something like this. The next Battlefield game won't have or need a co-op mode. I personally feel like we're past the age of needing a co-op mode in big multiplayer games like Battlefield. We're not in the same age where these back-of-the-box tick lists need to be created in order to sell a game anymore. We're living in the age of live service. Games are always growing and they evolve over time. The industry isn't selling static games anymore. They're all fluid and they're all updated all the time. And modes like cookie-cutter co-op slapped into a mainly multiplayer game to try and say that it's got more content, well, that's just a waste of time. And that's exactly what Combined Arms was for Battlefield 5. It was a complete waste of development time from DICE, and for players, it was a complete waste of time to play. Thirdly, let's talk about Firestorm. The first and probably biggest mistake with this game mode was not having it ready for the launch of Battlefield 5. Instead, it came out 5 months later, in 2019. And by that point, Call of Duty Blackout had already launched another big battle royale from, arguably, Battlefield's biggest competitor. That took away a lot of focus from Firestorm, and of course there are other players in the battle royale genre. PUBG and Fortnite, they were just further increasing their emphasis on the genre. The second mistake was having it linked, having it part of Battlefield 5, which locked it behind a $60 paywall. And that was while the general direction of the Battle Royale subgenre was moving towards free-to-play, supported by Battle Passes and cosmetic microtransactions. And what makes this decision even harder to understand is that EA, just a few weeks previously, they released another game, Apex Legends, a free-to-play, fast-paced Battle Royale from the Titanfall universe that was supported by cosmetic microtransactions. Seems strange that they wouldn't do exactly the same thing with Battlefield, even though we know they would have attracted a very different audience. The third mistake was grounding the Battle Royale in World War II, limiting the weaponry that was available to be used or added as time went on. Just like any historical setting, there will be limitations to what you can produce when it comes to making a video game, assuming that you want to stick to history and not try and change it. So a modern war setting with all that modern weaponry, all those crazy gadgets and all those vehicles that can create chaos, perhaps a modern setting was what was needed for a Battlefield Battle Royale game. And then the fourth mistake was handing control of the mode from Criterion to DICE. And the reason that was a bad move is because DICE was already overloaded with the multiplayer segment of Battlefield 5. And just a few short weeks later, they cut support for the mode completely. They had to go and work on the main multiplayer experience, and so Firestorm was completely dropped. There's lots of ifs and buts here for Firestorm, but I think it's clear to tell that the mishandling of the game mode directly contributed to its downfall, and it only further served to harm the reputation of Battlefield 5, and that's really sad because of the amount of time that it took to build this game mode from the Criterion studio. I got to visit the team a couple of times and they were really excited about what they were making, and underneath some of these outlying problems, they had created a very good classic take on Battle Royale, but it was never even given a chance. And the amount of money that will have been spent on developing the mode as well, that will have been fairly substantial. So to see the mode fail just a couple of weeks after it launched, that is extremely sad. Fourth on my list here is Tides of War, from a player's perspective, not from DICE's perspective. So let me try and explain what I mean by that. In many conversations that I've had with DICE at events, the Tides of War structure that they built, releasing a new item every week for unlock, According to them, it was working as intended. It kept players coming back to the game, resulting in higher engagement due to the prize that was on offer, whatever that might have been. However, from a player's point of view, I grew to dislike the system the longer it went on for. To begin with Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the Tides of War was full of new weapons to unlock, and that meant that every week, not only did I have a new set of challenges to complete, but the prize that I was given for completing those, it also had a function. It was a brand new weapon that I could use and have some good fun with afterwards. Then as time went on, Chapters 4, 5 and 6, the Tides of War kind of just turned into a vending machine of cosmetics and rank tier skips, which are hardly the most exciting offers. The system might have increased engagement, but I think it did it in a far less organic way than using the now almost industry standard Battle Pass system. This lines up hundreds of items and rewards in a tier system that can be progressed through at a player's own pace. Battlefield 5 actually has one of these. It's the chapter reward system. It functions in basically the same way. In Chapters 5 and 6, DICE finally understood the power of that system and implemented certain weapons and gadgets into the chapter rewards, giving players a constant source of progression and a way to unlock items at their own pace, rather than having to wait each week for a new item to appear. Progression, keeping players engaged, keeping players active, that's been an issue that DICE has really struggled with, moving from the Battlefield 4 days through to Battlefield 1 and now through to Battlefield 5. And I think that's in part because the menu UI system that they've moved to, it does a really bad job of easily telling players what they can actually work towards. You have to bury through several submenus to find the dog tag section, where progress bars then show you what you need to do to unlock each of the dog tags. The assignment system, that's limited to tracking just 4 assignments at once, and is a massive UX limitation that frankly shouldn't exist in a game like Battlefield. The ribbon system being completely broken and disabled, and missing a huge number of ribbons that you could get in previous games, that's not going to help with progression either. Tides of War was all about keeping players together and keeping them engaged, and on paper, that might have been the case, once a week getting them to come back. But perhaps the numbers show that because DICE gave players almost no other way to engage with the game, forcing them to do exactly what DICE wanted, rather than having the freedom to do what they wanted, that might have skewed the numbers a little bit. I didn't like Tides of War by the end. I liked it at the beginning, when there was lots of cool stuff being given out, but by the end, when that content had run dry, it was kind of just a useless system. Number 5 is Elite Soldiers. These can probably go down as one of the worst ideas to hit Battlefield in a long time. Implementing goofy, wacky, off-brand soldiers into the game under the guise of them being rare or valuable somehow, that's not a great idea when the historical conflict you're depicting has already been twisted and warped by other creative decisions within the game's development. With them being paid items as well, that was kind of insult to injury. DICE actively chose to put these creations up for sale when many of them greatly deviated from the look and feel of the other characters in the game, sticking out like a massive sore thumb. You also couldn't mix and match the outfits with other soldiers. They were made as one unit rather than being broken apart like all of the other outfits, and to top it all off, you could use them across theatres. Japanese soldiers running around as part of the German army on French maps, French and Irish soldiers running around as part of the American invasion forces in the Pacific. You can add these to the pile of, this game doesn't feel like World War II feedback, and I'm sure there's plenty of that for DICE to read through. And then lastly, limited time game modes. They came at this issue from completely the wrong angle, did DICE, and they implemented a solution to a problem that arguably didn't exist. The wrong angle, first of all. DICE decided to cut game modes from Battlefield 5 and use them as limited time offerings. Wrong move. Rush was omitted from Battlefield 5, a core game mode that existed for over a decade in the franchise, cut from the current mainline Battlefield title. Not a good idea. Frontlines and Domination removed after launch, with DICE citing they needed to keep playlist numbers lower. Again, not a good look. Then, creating new game modes like Grind, Fortress and Outpost, and only adding them to the game for a week or so, and then taking them away again. Not a great idea. DICE decided to use game modes themselves as limited time offerings, rather than adopting the tried and tested way of implementing modifiers and mutators into the game modes that they actually supported. Now, Battlefield 1 did this very thing, and Back to Basics is probably the best example of that. The mode removed all primary weapon options from soldiers, apart from the standard issue weapon of the army they were playing as. So the Americans, they got a Springfield rifle. The Germans, the Gewehr 98. The British, they got a Lee Enfield rifle. And players could only use iron sight rifles to fight with. That's all they got, and then they got their secondaries as well. They could be any class they wanted, so you could be a medic and you could still revive people, or you could be an assault player and you could target vehicles, but the modifier was you could only use your nation's bolt-action rifle. And it completely changed the gameplay experience. You were still playing Conquest or Frontlines, but the speed of the gameplay changed. The gunfights changed. The way objectives were fought over changed. The game mode remained the same, but it felt very, very different. That is a limited time game mode format, not taking away game modes and then adding them back in again a couple of months later. People like game modes. That's why they want to play them. So taking them away and then adding them back in for a short period of time, that's not going to win you many fans. Again, like Tides of War, I'm sure on paper, DICE has got some amazing numbers for player population of Rush when it was enabled. But of course they will. If that's the only time players can actually play the mode, they're going to flock to it. Artificially, you're creating interest in something by flicking it on and off again. So that's my major list of things that kind of flopped in Battlefield 5. I know there's a bunch more stuff out there that you guys will probably point out, and lots of smaller things as well. So if you've got any that you want to list, drop them down below in the comments section and let me know your opinions. But thanks very much for watching today. Leave me a rating as well, it is always appreciated, and I'll catch you all in the next one.